Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. This is MTA International USA Studios in Silver Spring, Maryland. My name is Ahmad Khan, and I will be moderating today's discussion on Islam Ahmadiyya in America. Our esteemed panelists today are Brother Al-Haj Habeeb Shafeeq of Orlando and Brother Al-Haj Yaqub of Milwaukee. Brother Al-Haj Habeeb Shafeeq served in the education industry as social services professional, social services consultant. He acquired his master's in public administration. He worked in city government planning, special projects planning. He's a world traveler. His passion is community service and education. In his off time, he loves to cook and garden. Brother Al-Haj Yaqub served in the military during the Vietnam era, served as an executive management proprietary schools, worked in the nonprofit for 10 years. He worked at quality control in the American Society of Mechanical Engineers as a code inspector. He's a writer, he's a thinker, and a scholar. In the previous episode, we came to the conclusion that it was that the teachings of the promised Messiah that were inclusive in the Ahmadiyya Muslim community that brought and attracted the spiritual human beings to this community. And in return, we changed the system in return. It was not the other way around. We highlighted that with the jazz era period of time where there were a number of people from the African American community primarily who were jazz musicians, and he converted over to the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. So with that, we learned that their behavior and personalities, when they were accepting of the promised message of the promised Messiah, they changed their own system and industry in return, and it was not the other way around. And with that in mind, it allows us to see how the quality of our message was still being the success of our community. And with that, we will explore the decade of the 1960s, and we'll see how our quality of message never changed. It was still the same message, and we weren't really successful because of our numbers. So with the first question, I would like to go into the discussion towards Brother Habeeb. What kind of effect did it have on individual members of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community in the U.S. at the time of, and this is something that was a very important time, but a very fearful time, the passing away of the second Khalifa. So what kind of sentiments would the members of that community might have at that time that might not be even possible to explain in words? And also because they might have never seen the second Khalifa as well. So can you kind of give a perspective or introspective on that?
Well, thank you. The last part of your question was that they'd never seen him was irrelevant to those individuals at the time. The effect and the progress and just the overall contribution of not only was he the second Khalifa, but he was the promised son. There were prophecies about him being the Fazli Ummah. So remember, those are early converts from the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. The only leadership and the only relationship with Caliphate that they had was with this Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Sani, may Allah rest his soul. That was the first thing. So there was, of course, this uncertainty because we were not at the time used to this kind of discontinuation and did not understand the quickness of the continuity of Caliphate. I'll give you an example in my own household. My father accepted during the time of that Caliphate. My father was not an emotional, sullen person bent to weeping and crying and sullen disposition. When Khalifa Sani passed, there was just this sadness that was occurring in our household from our father. And it was 6 of us boys, And it affected all of us because we had never seen our father this way.
Innately understood.
Not innately. It was very pronounced that my beloved Khalifa, and he would just, in our prayers, he would just be moaning, and he lost emotional control while leading the prayers. This was not something very silent and quiet. So, and what I can say is two things, is that the second Khalifa was all we knew to that point. And in our own household, we saw our father, who was a manly man, just absolutely broken and like he didn't know what he was going to do. And it was
that exhibited in his body language?
Not just his body language, in his words. He didn't want to eat, but my father always gave very long prayers. And as boys, we thought that our father prayed too long. But in his prayers, my father would be weeping and crying out to Allah about the loss of the Khalifa, and he made my mom find all of the pictures, and he started pulling out all the pictures and all the letters that he had. No, sir, this was not just something quiet and sullen and dignified. My father, this affected our household.
Brother Yaqub.
Yes, sir.
There's a message that, in going off of the passing away of the second Khalifa, then quickly, in a very quick and expedient fashion, the Jamaat elected the third Khalifa, Hazrat Mirza Nasir Ahmad. May Allah have mercy on him. And in his respect, he gave an address directed to the United States. I'm going to kind of read you a quotation of that address, and it says, he said in the address, it is for you to remove the idols of class and color, race and prejudice from the hearts of men and women and bring them back to their Creator. Can you kind of give your analysis of how was that an uplifting, keeping in mind of what we discussed in the past, that the message was still the same, that whether it was a Khalifa or the missionaries, they were reiterating those same words of equality within our community?
Right. Keeping everything in context of the times, this was in the middle of the civil rights era, and that particular message that was given by the Khalifa was really the signal of where we should be in those times. That is that we should be the example of equality. We don't have to hang our heads for any other reason or any other concept other than being men who are serving their Creator. That's the basic message that we receive from that. As a matter of fact, many of the new converts during that particular period came from organizations that were driving the civil rights movement.
And the civil rights happened in 1964.
1964. They signed the civil rights legislation. And so as a result of some of the COINTELPRO to break up these organizations, there was members who came into the Ahmadiyya movement who were, in fact, wanted to carry on a revolution. And when they came in, there wasn't a bloody revolution that had to be carried on. It was a spiritual one that they were introduced to. And so they learned how to do that, and they pushed that forward. And this was the message that helped transition many people.
And it's also interesting to know that we were always ahead of the time. The Civil Rights Act happened in 1964.
Right.
They finally got to understand that racial equality is the way to go.
Right, exactly.
And we were saying that message for the last 50 or 60 years.
Exactly.
Within the message of what Islam has taught us.
Right.
Brother Habeeb, with these conventions that were taking place, annual conventions in the community,
Yes.
did this help increase our intercollaboration as Ahmadiyya Muslims or members of this community, and also connect us more?
The conventions were fun, and I remember them being a time of much excitement. And what they did, two things that I remember. First, you would not only meet and see people that you knew from the previous year, but then there would be new people that you would be introduced to. But what it did with respect to organization is that it began to introduce us as a collective that was united under this banner called the Ahmadiyya Movement in Islam under the Khalifa of the time. And while we had different basketball teams or football teams in our cities, we had different shapes of our mosque, etc., we came united under this banner of Islam and Ahmadiyyat, and you would meet new friends, you would meet old ones, and as importantly, what was the new book? You would go to that person from Pittsburgh. Do you guys have a copy of this yet? Or have you seen X, Y, and Z? Or did you see what these words in the Gazette, etc.? So the convention became that place where we would meet, share the good news.
Did you enjoy them too as well?
Oh my goodness! You wouldn't go to sleep. You would have to come home to get rest. You would not even go to sleep. You would be up talking, comparing things, and this and that. And those of us who were younger coming there, we did not dare jump into the conversations of our elders because we were not read enough. Our elder converts, while they came in considered illiterate, they had Islam and Ahmadiyyat gave them a literacy that was beyond college education. So you just didn't walk up to Brother Sadiq or Brother Muzaffar or some other elder and just Abd Hanif Saab and just start talking and jumping in. You were listening, you were learning things, they were quoting books, they were quoting this, and they always, always, always quoted the Holy Quran. And this was the extraordinary thing about it.
So it had several benefits to the community, not just the intercollaboration. It looks like there was spiritual benefits
Absolutely.
too. There was social benefits too, because you were meeting some people that you might have not known before. Now you can get to know them. And also the exploring or increasing your horizons on understanding.
And one last one you forgot is that was we began to see Ahmadiyyat as a divine system.
And not just a unit.
Absolutely. All these parts from different cities came under this banner and set in this one body, and it was absolutely exhilarating. It was
Speaking of systems.
Yes.
Brother Yaqub, and I want to kind of set the stage for that. I'm going to talk about auxiliaries, specifically the men's youth auxiliary. I want to make a point to let everyone know that before 1969, only National MK USA office was of Motamids, who is the secretary of Majlis Khudam al-Ahmadiyya, and who acted or worked with missionary in charge as Naib Sadr of the International Sadr or president of the men's youth organization of Ahmadiyya Muslim Community. So I just want to make sure that everybody knows that. But in 1969, we were officially made into we established an organization where there was a national guide. Right. And it was not a Naib Sadr anymore. And the first national guide was Munir Hamid. And my question is, with this introduction, and he had to establish just kind of a couple of things. He established his own departments, which we did not have before, like enrollment, keeping track of the numbers of the community, religious instructions, propagation, just to name a few.
Cooking, ziyafat.
Cooking, those kinds of things that we as a auxiliary, men's youth auxiliary, had to manage and help the larger Ahmadiyya Muslim community. So with that introduction, how did this auxiliary set the stage to help the Ahmadiyya Muslim community even further? We established that Lajna Imala, which was established, the Women's Auxiliary, was established in 1950, created that, the better half of us to help with all of our efforts in the propagation of Islam Ahmadiyya. How did Majlis or men's youth organization did do that for us?
The main thrust that Munir Hamid gifted us with was, it's captured in his motto. He used to always say, "Let the workers work." Now, we were young men, and the Majlis Kudama Ahmadiyya that was introduced to us gave us structure and discipline and helped us take that youthful energy and guide it in to meet the aims and objectives of the overall Ahmadiyya Muslim community.
Quite.
I think that was the
Absolutely.
And I was a new convert. I had signed to buy it in 1969. So being on the ground floor, I thought that this was great. This was something that...
Did it help with obedience?
Oh boy. Yes.
It was a matter of how do you...
One of the tenets of Islam, obedience. So I'm saying, did it help with that to inculcate that value into
We were introduced to the concept of obedience to the Khalifa. And that obedience didn't mean that we were robots or something like that. We were encouraged to think, but we were introduced to an order, and there was a head, and that we had to receive instructions, which we did, and we had to carry out a certain task. And Munir was the type of person that encouraged us to work. So he didn't want us to just sit around and do anything. And one of the challenges that he had was, this was new, brand new. And for many, the formulation of the Majlis Kudama Ahmadiyya was going against our elders who thought that we might be a breakaway organization or something.
That was kind of my next question. What kind of challenges was he having?
Yeah, I mean, in many respects, some of the elders who, they treated us as if that they were our fathers. And when you start talking about the Majlis Kudama Ahmadiyya, and we had our own organization and thing, that was kind of taking them back. They didn't quite know how to deal with that at first. And so we were formulating our constitution was introduced to us, the aims and objectives of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community as far as what the youth, what their role was. And that was captured in a phrase that the Majlis Kudama Ahmadiyya was the backbone.
Backbone.
And as the backbone, we did...
And to be clear, it's an auxiliary,
Yeah,
which
right.
is assisting the community in whatever it needs, what its needs are at the time.
Right.
And it reports directly to the Khalifa of the time.
Exactly.
So that was the main purpose of an auxiliary.
The big picture, yes.
And you said it perfectly. It was the backbone
of the movement.
Of the movement.
Right.
I want to kind of talk about something external that was happening on the side. And it was with the popularity of a very influential person called Malcolm X. The reason I want to kind of see this, because he grew in popularity. In fact, his movement actually grew in popularity, because I don't want to talk about the movement itself, because that's not relevant within the discussion. But just to set up a framework, he attracted people like Muhammad Ali. What was the attraction behind this person who also increased the status of his movement?
There's an Arabic term that we use, Qaul Sadid, and that's to speak the straightforward talk. And that's what Malcolm was very good at. He was good at being able to analyze something, whatever it is, it may be social or economic, and then be able to give it back to an audience in a language in which that they could understand. And that was very straightforward and very direct. That was number one.
So that goes with the teaching of kind of like Islam, speak the straightforward word.
Right.
And that's what we were doing in the beginning when Mufti Muhammad Sadiq Saab or
Right.
Mutir Rahman Bengali they were doing the same thing. They were very straightforward.
Very straightforward,
Yes, but-
very direct.
But Haji's point here is that this was an Afro-American, and he coined that term, speaking to power, speaking to the white power structure with that kind of straight bareness, and talking about race the way we talk about it today. This was unheard of and extraordinarily dangerous, but it also had an attraction.
I'm glad you brought that out. The other factor was that what Malcolm introduced, and it's an Islamic concept. Under Christianity, anything that happened to us, you would turn the other cheek and offer the other cheek for someone to beat up on you. Malcolm said, you know, you may slap me on one cheek, but I may hit you back. Now, what this did was introduce to the world that Islam is a peaceful religion, but in terms of being able to safeguard our families and our homes, we have an obligation to do that. That was revolutionary because as people that have been harassed, made slaves of, you were supposed to be docile and take anything that was given out, and Malcolm was saying, we're not going to do that anymore.
So when you read about these kinds of things about him, it makes sense that he became very influential because of these very reasons. And
there was an Ahmadi who contacted him. His name was Haji Hanif Ahmed, and he lived in, he was from the Chicago, Detroit area, but he died ultimately in Zion. But he met Malcolm. And Haji, didn't you did an account of that at one point? Yes, sir.
This Haji Hanif preached to Malcolm. He tried to convert Malcolm to Ahmadiyya. And Malcolm did not reject his message of Islam or Ahmadiyya. Mm-hmm. What he simply told him was, he said it was Elijah Muhammad who helped me, and I couldn't turn my back on him. So the role that Elijah Muhammad had in terms of being able to reform Malcolm from a criminal, bringing him out of prison and being the spokesman, eventually being a spokesman to his organization, Malcolm felt indebted to that individual for that.
And remember also, a lot of people at the time who were African American, they did not like Malcolm. They did not like Malcolm's straightforwardness. He was totally different. He did not stay in a place. So Malcolm was not by no means just this overwhelmingly popular African American among Africans. Many thought he was considered a troublemaker, and that Dr. King was a more palatable solution for the so-called Negro problem.
It gives us a new perspective that if you have, it's not just the individual that makes the message or the community. The quality comes from the divine help that the promised Messiah, as a prophet, as a Messiah, had received, and was reassured through divine help, and that would succeed in this country.
Right.
So you can have great speakers, you can have skillful orators, but the message has to have the backing of divine help.
Exactly.
And among ourselves, we talk about this and talked about it a lot, that essentially just this very point that you very wisely bring up, and that is that when Malcolm really got to this point where he saw, he had this profound realization that the divinity that he thought that his movement and his founder had, he did not have that.
In speaking of a broader...
not divinity, divine support.
Yes.
Divine support.
Thank you very much. In speaking on a broader perspective, when we were talking about other Muslim communities, were they even changing the face of Islam in America at all? In any way, or did they even focus on the part of the faith, or is it just still the same they were growing as a community and it was a cultural thing and they had different agendas?
From my viewpoint, I think that these different Islamic organizations were there to provide support to their ethnic groups. I didn't think it went any further than that. They didn't have a mandate to preach Islam to anyone, but just
they were trying to assimilate and make money, honestly.
Yeah. And it feels like that is the case in this decade, and it was growing in that direction.
Right.
Yeah.
It wasn't growing in the direction of, oh, now we're learning and we should actually.
That our principal objective is to spread Islam and bring back the. No.
And so it kind of leads us to the final question. Was our original message or the quality of our original message, was that altered in any way in this decade?
No.
Not at all. As a matter of fact, it
didn't change a bit.
It didn't change a bit.
It's still the same.
It got a little sharper, particularly internally with our elders when they didn't understand what this Qadam al-Ahmad did. I remember them thinking that we were just paramilitary, but so it got really sharp and little testy with our elder Ahmadi elders, but for the most part, no, it became even more sharper, pronounced, because it wasn't just Malcolm, but it was other militant nationalistic groups that influenced. Brother Muzaffar was a colonel in the New Republic of Africa. Our Haji Aminallah came from that organization, and more science. So it was a convergence of all these different things into Qadam al-Ahmadiyyat.
Into Qadam al-Ahmadiyyat.
Yes,
and
into Qadam al-Ahmadiyyat.
In that convergence and our constancy of our message, the quality of our message, it was building our success more so. And again, it was not about the numbers. It was how we were reaching to people.
And it started to create a yearning for, who is this Khalifa? What is this Khalifa?
I think we can conclude this discussion to say that definitely our message was not changed. It was still about the idea of having a universal message, a message of equality, and it was to discuss Islam on the truest path, on its most purest convictions. So with that, we were reaching to people, to their hearts, and to change who they were, what they were before. So that was our objective originally, and that was the promise that was given to the promised Messiah, Islam, that is how the sun will rise in the West.
Yes.
So with that brief overview, you can find all of this information on www.alislam.org/sunrise, or you can go to www.muslimsunrise.com. Thank you for joining us. This is MTA International Studios, Silver Spring, Maryland, on Islam Ahmadiyya in America. Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum.